We're meeting today Alex Michaelides. Hello, Alex.
Hello, hi.
Who's joining us from London to talk about his two books, The Silent Patient, the #1 bestseller on the Litera publishing house list, and The Maidens, his upcoming book, which is going to be published this June. So Alex is a very much loved author here in Romania and worldwide, and we are very glad to have you as a guest today. This is a special event. It's a festival because every May, June, we have this important festival for the Litera publishing house, and all our main authors are present one way or another. We hope that soon you can come here in person. So as I said, your book, The Silent Patient, is a hit. You know this. You're very, very much loved here. Your audience is reading you like crazy. So I'll start from...
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for giving us this book, which I heard is going to be turned into a movie by Brad Pitt's company. So Plan B is making a movie after The Silent Patient. That's great news. Right. Well,
yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's very exciting. They have a script now, and I think a director attached. I can't say too much about it, but hopefully there will be some news later in the year, which will be exciting. Yeah.
Well, we're looking forward to it. So, well, about the Silent Patient, how come the idea, this great idea? I've read a lot about the mythological roots of your book. And also, since you are a psychotherapist, I think that tapped into your literary persona when you wrote this. What is it about, without going into detail for the few who haven't read the book so far? And how do you feel to have such a success after 2 years only?
Okay, so it's about a famous painter called Alicia, who one day shoots her husband and kills him, and then she never speaks again. And the novel is narrated by Theo Faber, who is a psychotherapist, and he's attempting to work with Alicia to try and get her to start talking again, as well as unravel the mystery of what happened the night that she killed her husband. You know, I'm not a psychotherapist. I studied psychotherapy, but I quit the training because I realized that a couple of reasons. You know, one, I was too selfish to be a therapist, I think. And the other reason was I realized that I was a writer, you know, and that I was meeting all of these people and I was wanting to go home and write about it instead. And so I decided to leave the training, but I encountered a lot of therapists there who were, some of them were very good and some of them were very bad. And that's what led me to feel that I wanted to try and write a very complex portrayal of psychotherapy and psychotherapists in general, and not quite as simplistic as I had seen on television or in cinemas before. So how does it feel? It feels great. I mean, you know, it took a while because it was such an unexpected success. And when I wrote the book, I wrote it just for myself, and I didn't even have an agent at that point. I wasn't expecting anyone to read it. And so the success took me by surprise. And it was, maybe I was in a little bit of shock, I think, for a year or so. It was quite a weird feeling because I didn't quite know how to. Everyone would say to me, "You must be so happy, you must be so happy." And I couldn't feel anything. It was very odd. But now with, you know, 2 years on, I've relaxed into it. And it's been nice having another book to write, to focus on that, you know.
Mm-hmm. So you come from a family of mixed origins. Did this help you? When I ask this, I'm thinking of Kazuo Ishiguro and Salman Rushdie or Elif Shafak. They embrace another culture, another language. Of course, English is your mother tongue, but still, is it more fruitful to come from two origins? For instance, for this book, I read that Alcestis, Euripides' play, is one of your main sources. Can you tell us a bit more about this and how you play this richness of your origins and you help it get into your writing?
That's a really interesting question. And I think the answer is yes. I mean, you know, I think it's, so I grew up in Cyprus. My mother is English and my father is Greek-Cypriot. And so I speak both languages, but I definitely would say that English was the language that I dream in, you know, or I decided I had to write in. So what's special about it for me, I think, is that I'm a writer who writes in English, and yet my influences are mainly Greek. And I don't think that's particularly common. I think that's what you mean about the different cultures. And it was amazing because it gave me, the Greek mythology is everywhere in Cyprus, and you grow up like being taught the myths at school. It gave me a place, I suppose, of inspiration and where my imagination kind of sits. And so I'm always referring back to Greek mythology and to Greek tragedy, And with regard to the Alcestis, I came across the play when I was about 13. I think we studied it at school. And basically, in a nutshell, she's a heroine who she dies to save her husband. Then she's brought back to life again at the end of the play, and she's reunited with her husband, but she won't speak to him, and she doesn't speak again until the end of the play. And it's not often performed because it's a kind of problematic play. People don't know how to respond to that. They don't know whether she's silent because she's angry or whether she's so moved and overjoyed to see him again, or, you don't quite understand the silence. And for whatever reason, there was something about this that just bothered me and kind of haunted my imagination for another 20 years or so, almost 15 years before I actually wrote the book. And I tried to write it as a one-act play, and then I tried to write it as a short film. And it was only years later, when I had worked in a psychiatric institute, that I had the idea of resetting the Greek myth inside a psychiatric institute. And from then, everything kind of came together really well.
It is a great setup for a play as well, for the opera.
Yeah.
And I also thought that maybe Alicia comes from Alcestis because you kept the alliteration. So
Yes. The original title was Alcestis, and then I just thought, A, no one would be able to pronounce that, and B, it wasn't a very good title. So I changed it, and I changed her name as well.
But did you intend it as a thriller when you started it? You thought, this is going to be a thriller, so you thought, I'm going to write within the genre.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because this has been problematic for me. The word thriller is not, because I don't think it's particularly thrilling. I think of it much more as the way I describe it is like a psychological detective story. And so for me, I'm more interested in a slower pace, and a kind of investigation. Whereas when I think of thriller, I think of people running and hiding and being chased by guns. And, I think of a different kind of thing. But definitely within the kind of mystery detective genre as a whole, yes, I was very keen because, when I grew up in Cyprus, the first adult writer I ever read was Agatha Christie. And I loved reading all of her novels. Like when I was quite young, it was my first introduction into reading. And one summer, I just read all of them on the beach. And I knew then that if I ever wanted to write a novel, I would like to try and write something like that. Because I like the format, I like the crime investigation and then revelation or explanation at the end. And so it's like a structure, that holds a lot of stuff, but it gives you a format. And there's something about that format which makes me feel quite safe as a writer, if you understand what I mean. Yeah,
of course. So it's thrilling, and also it's very cinematic. So right. I thought maybe you wanted to write it for the movies. So
I'm very, I love Alfred Hitchcock, and so. I didn't write it for the movies. It was a definite, because I had written movies before and I had not had very good experiences. It was an attempt to try and see if I could just write a book, and so I was never thinking of it being a film. But I love Alfred Hitchcock. I love all of his films a lot. And so it was always in my head a kind of stylistic approach of how he might direct it. And that helped me think about how to write it, if that makes sense.
Of course it does. So also you're a Cambridge graduate. Is it important when you start writing to have such a background, to have studied English literature? Does it help? Because many writers don't come from this background.
Yeah.
And they say, no, for instance, the courses of creative writing are not important, so we shouldn't be bothered with such things. But somehow...
No one's asked me that before. That's an interesting question, because I think I can't really... Well, I guess I could kind of answer it. I mean, so... When I studied, English, it wasn't a creative writing course. It was just studying literature. And then I remember thinking at the time that, I wanted to get more information about how to be a writer. It didn't really help me, I thought, at the time. And then when I studied screenwriting at the American Film Institute in Los Angeles, that was much more of a creative writing course. And to be honest with you, I found that less helpful, I think. So now, 10, 15 years on, I look back on this time, and I think that it's more useful if you want to be a writer to read great writers than it is to go to a course and be taught formulas about how to write. And I think the attempt to try and write from a creative writing school perspective with this has to happen on page 10, this has to happen on page 30. I think it harmed me for a long time as a writer. And it was only when I then tried to forget all of those rules and just go back to writing something, organic that pleased me, was that I had success, Mm-hmm. So I'm not very into creative writing teaching. I don't think it helps that much.
Mm-hmm. Who are your favorite writers? English or American or worldwide?
I have, I love, like I said, I love Agatha Christie. I love Margaret Atwood a great deal. She doesn't write the same kind of books as I do, but there's a great poetry to her language, which I find really, fascinating. I like quite traditional classic English writers. I mean, Henry James, he was obviously American, but he's been a big influence on me. And it's about, what I love about him is perspective. And so he's very much like Agatha Christie, is that he will present you with three characters. And for the whole book, you're looking at them the wrong way around, and then finally you realize that he flips it around and you understand, which is what Christie does too. And that's what I try to do with The Silent Patient as well.
Mm-hmm. How about your new book, The Maidens? What is it about? Is it also tapping into mythological ideas or themes?
Yeah.
Yes,
definitely. It is very much so. I went back to the same kind of preoccupations that I have, which is, psychology, mythology, and murder again. And The Maidens is set at a Cambridge college, and it's about a Greek tragedy professor who is suspected of murdering his students who belong to a secret society called the Maidens. And it came for me, the inspiration came from the myth of Iphigenia in Greek, or Iphigenia in English, particularly again a play by Euripides. And Iphigenia, as a young girl, is sentenced to death. She's sacrificed by her father, Agamemnon, to appease the gods. And in the play by Euripides, she alone calls her father a great man, and everybody else seems to have a very negative opinion of him and his actions. Mm-hmm. And there was something about her desire to please him, even to die to please her father, that really triggered me, and it bothered me. And I kept trying to think about it because I thought it was very toxic. Mm-hmm. And so that was the initial launch pad for the book, was thinking about what happens if we mistake, as very young children, if we mistake abuse for love, and how that can color the way that we see ourselves when we see the rest of our lives. And so that was something I wanted to try and dramatize in that myth and bring it to life with the Maidens. Yeah. So it was a darker and a sadder story, I think, than The Silent Patient. But
well, it's very interesting. Therefore, I think that your third book and your fourth and all the others will have mythology at the base or at their core. I think so. Yeah.
I mean, it's a good question. I think mythology always. I think psychology, maybe not. The heroine of The Maidens is called Mariana, and she's a group therapist, group psychotherapist. And I don't think I want to. I think I've kind of done everything I want to do with therapy now. I'd like to write something different next time. But group therapy was very. When I was training, I decided to be a group therapist, and so I specialized in that. And that was the reason that ultimately led me to quit the psychotherapy training, because I had a very bad group therapy experience with a supposedly very important, very famous group analyst. And I just found him to be very sadistic, and I found the people in the group were very vulnerable, and he would pick on them, and he would be quite cruel. And they would take this from him, and they thought they were getting therapy, but I think they were getting something that was a lot darker and a lot meaner. And I realized, I think that with groups, we have a tendency to make the group leader into our father. I mean, you just have to look at politics throughout history. And often we put all of our trust and all of our authority sometimes in these men who are sometimes very dangerous and very crazy. And there's something about that which I think is a reenactment of our childhood dynamic, where we're like children with our father. And again, for me, that linked into this idea of Iphigenia and the self-sacrifice for her father. And so all of these things were kind of working around in the novel. Yeah.
That's very interesting. So the idea of toxicity and abuse, and also the idea of healing, because actually in the end, everything turns out to be okay, or okay-ish. There is this cathartic feeling, like in the Greek mythology. Or in the Greek
absolutely. I think if you I've said this before, but I think if you can see your childhood clearly, then you can understand it. There's this psychoanalyst who had a great influence on me called Alice Miller. And she said that not only do we need to see our own childhoods clearly, we also need to see our parents' childhoods clearly in order to fully understand everything that's happened to us. And that's something I often think about too. So if there is any catharsis, it's the revelation of truth at the end, which also coincides, I haven't thought about that before, with a detective story. Because again, the catharsis is truth, it's the lies are stopped and there's an actual revelation of what really happened. So there's a similarity there, I think,
So should we assume that you prefer truth over beauty?
Yes.
Yes.
In a word, yes.
Well, maybe later on in your career you'll change your mind, but maybe. It's like maybe it's your psychoanalytical background. So are you involved in the writing of the movie now without revealing too much about it?
No, I'm not. I felt that it was a decision we came to together because I felt I had another book to write, and I'm really glad that I did, because it was very hard to write my second book. And also they wanted to have a fresh approach, and they didn't want to have the writer hanging around, I think I'm very flexible as a writer, but I think I didn't used to be when I was younger. And so I think they were perhaps worried that, they, having dealt with writers before, that people can they can cling on to their material, whereas I don't really tend to do that. But I was happy to be able to write the next book. And I'm curious to see the film. People keep saying to me, am I going to read the script? And I've got no desire to even read the script. I'm just going to see the movie, like a fan, like anyone else, because it doesn't feel like, it's hard to explain, but when you make a film, it's like, I've had this experience many times before. It's taken away from you, this thing that you write, and it becomes somebody else's, and then it's there, and then they retell the story themselves. And so already I feel quite removed from the film of The Silent Patient, and I'm sure it'll be completely different to my book as well.
Absolutely. As long as you can recognize the story, but the story stays. So do you believe that the story is the most important, or the characters, or the technique? Because there are writers and writers. Some prefer the story, some others prefer the technique, or the characters, or the plot. Yeah,
that's interesting. Ideally, Henry James said that the plot and character should be the same thing, and so only one character would act in a specific way, and so it's his character which dictates the plot, who was it who said, was it Herodotus? Somebody said, no, it wasn't him. Somebody said character is fate. I don't remember who, one of the ancient Greeks. And I think that's the nice way to think about it. But plot is really important. Plot is, I really enjoy plot. I enjoy the symmetry. I enjoy working everything out, the architecture of it. And I think of particularly, not like a Ishiguro, but, in the kind of type of novel, the genre that I'm working in, it's very much about the plot. It's very much about the architecture of the story. Everything has to balance and make sense. And, and also you're telling two stories, because you're telling the apparent story, which the reader thinks they're reading. And then you're also telling the true story underneath, which is, I guess, the murderer's story, and it's the secret story underneath that they're trying to hide from you, the reader. And so there's a lot of complication, I think, in it, which I find very interesting.
What kind of a writer are you in this respect? So do you want to have control over everything, to know everything beforehand, to plot everything accordingly, and to know the end from the very beginning? Or you just get along with the characters and you get surprised by them, and sometimes there are turns and twists?
Where I leave myself a lot of fluidity is the dialogue. And so I'm never really entirely sure what they're going to say to each other. And so that's something where I allow myself to be surprised. With The Silent Patient, I plotted everything out very, very meticulously. And it didn't really change. But then with The Maidens, it was a really different experience, because I knew where I wanted to end up. but I didn't know how to get there. And I couldn't make it work for a very long time, and I was going to abandon it. And then I spoke to a writer. I was introduced to a crime writer called Sophie Hannah, who's quite famous in the UK. And she was very kind. She's the only person in 3 years that I told the story of the Maidens to. And I said, I don't know how to make the ending work. I can't make it work, so I'm going to give up. And she said, if God came down and he said to you that you had to have that ending, how would you make it work? And then by the time that I got on the train and I went back to London to my house, the idea came to me. And so I think it's a really interesting example of how imagination works. And there was something about, she said something that sort of gave permission to my subconscious to work it out, you know, which is really interesting. But in answer to your question, it was written in quite a different way to my first book. And now as an experiment, I'm trying to write something where I don't plan it at all. I'm trying to write really fast and just see where it takes me. So it's a nice feeling to be, it's more frightening to write where you don't know where you're going, I think. And I think the excessive plotting and planning is a way to protect yourself, you know, somehow.
Yes, well, we all have our wall of defenses.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
I wanted to ask you if you are Theo Faber from the book, because the readers often mistake this the characters with the writer, especially if it's a book written in the first person.
Yes.
So they think that if you take reality as it is and put it in a book, it will automatically work. It doesn't work like that. So are you Theo Faber?
I think I'm both of them, to be honest with you. I'm Theo and I'm also Alicia as well, because they're both half of my personality, you know, like all of the stuff in her diary where she's writing about being an artist and about the painting. That was all, you know, me transposing my experience as a writer into being a painter. And so all of that stuff felt very authentic to me, you know, and Theo likewise, but I think Theo is probably more damaged than I am and more complicated. But yeah, there's definitely commonalities, of course. Yeah.
What are you writing now?
Now, well, I'm trying to write this thing, as I said to you. It's like a short story. It might be a longer novel. I'm not sure. And again, it's a thriller, but with a very small cast of characters and very intimate. And then after that, I'm going to write my next book, which I think I'm going to set in Hollywood for a change. And so it's a nice feeling. Also, The Maidens is going to be made into a TV series as well. But again, I'm not writing that. But I've been talking to the writer about that, which has been very interesting. It's a lovely place now. You know, honestly, writing the second book was really, really hard because suddenly I had all of this success and all of this pressure. And I found it almost crippling, you know. And so the fact that I was able to, after 3 years, finally finish the second book, and I'm quite proud of it, and I think it's quite good. And so I feel that in itself is a huge reassurance. And so I think anything from now on, I'm looking forward to writing. It's going to be fun the next few years. I'm just going to, particularly after the pandemic, you know, I'm looking forward to life just generally, I think.
But did it help to stay inside? Sorry, and to write?
Yeah.
Or did it feel like a constraint? Like, no, I don't feel like writing because now I have all the time to do it. So I just want to get out.
Well, I think writers are one of the very few professions who were relatively unaffected by the pandemic, because I work from home anyway, and I work alone anyway. And so it didn't change. What it really, really helped was that I had been traveling around promoting The Silent Patient. And suddenly it forced me to stop, and it forced me to sit at my table in the kitchen and just write it every day and not go out. I think without the pandemic, I probably wouldn't have finished the book yet. I think I would still be writing it. And so in a way, it really helped me concentrate, which was great. But it could have gone the other way, of course.
Well, yes, you never know. But
yeah.
Well, thank God you have finished the book, and now we look forward to reading it. And to welcoming you here in Bucharest. So.
Yeah, I'd love to come. Definitely. When things open up, I will definitely visit you guys.
You're most welcome. So one last question, because we have to end our meeting. Time is running out. What are you reading now? Or what is the last book you read?
I'm currently working my way through Dickens right now, Charles Dickens. So I'm reading Martin Chuzzlewit. I think, when I tend to read now, it's generally to try and learn things. And so I don't tend to read thrillers ever now, which surprises people. But I don't really have an interest in that. I have an interest in becoming a better writer. And so that's why I read people like Dickens and Evelyn Waugh and Henry James, because I'm trying to improve my writing style and also all kinds of other things. And there's just the way that Dickens tells stories. He's like Steven Spielberg. It's amazing. There's so much to learn in the storytelling technique of him. So that's what I'm trying to read right now.
Well, he's very dark, so he's like the father of all thrillers.
Yeah, they are, very much so, yeah.
He also has the psychological depth, so it's good to reading Dickens.
And the narration as well. I love the way that I won't use the word manipulates the reader, but I love the way that he takes you on a very complicated emotional journey, and he tricks you as well a lot of the time. And so it's fascinating, yeah. So
one classic a month, or at least one classic a year.
Yeah.
Keeps the inspiration going.
Every couple of months,
Yeah. Well, so do you have a message for the Romanian readers of your books, for the readers of The Silent Patient, and for the ones eagerly awaiting the Maidens?
I'd just like to say thank you. It's always so amazing. It's so funny, to speak to you now, and I haven't been to Romania, and yet to hear that people have read something that I wrote and that they like it. It makes me it's a really fantastic feeling, and it makes me very happy. And so I'm very grateful to my Romanian readers, and I really hope to meet them in person soon as well.
Well, thank you so much. I thank you on behalf of them and on behalf of the publishing house, and we are waiting for you here to come to launch your books.
Thank you very much.
And thank you so much for this interview and for the meeting.
It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. Me too.
De ziua noastră, tu primești cadoul. La Zilele Aniversare Litera ai peste 2500 de titluri cu reduceri de până la 90%, cadou garantat la orice comandă și evenimente de neratat. De 32 de ani aducem cartea în casele românilor. Hai pe litera.ro să-ți alegi ce citești.